Communication is an accelerant of dreams. Let me explain storytelling the easiest possible way to get people started in that journey, because it's not as hard as people think it is. Storytelling boils down to two things.
What are your best tips on people who want to get better at public speaking?
I don't think you're a bad communicator, Alex, because what I always like to say is it starts objective and it finishes subjective. So what does that mean?
I love that you leave that space for the conversation. Hi, and welcome to this new episode of the Lightleaders. Today I'm with Brenden, who is the founder of MasterTalk. He coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become top 1% communicators in their industry. He also has a popular YouTube channel with over 40,000 subscribers called MasterTalk, with the goal of providing free access to communication tools for everyone in the world. Brenden, I've looked at your YouTube channel. It's super interesting. And I'm also personally, as a podcast host and non-native speaker, actually always learning and excited to learn about speaking publicly. So thank you so much for joining. I will share also an invitation I have for you, Brenden, during this podcast is if there's anything you see in my communication that you feel I could improve, please share it as we go so I can have the learning through the experience, and through me, people may learn also and see the example of the things that we can improve. Brenden, I love to start with a very simple question, which is, what are you grateful for today?
Absolutely, Alex. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here. I'll definitely share some feedback as you'd like as we go around the show, as we start to practice some of the insights. I would say for me, what I'm grateful for is pushing myself out of my comfort zone this month. I did a lot of things in the last month that I probably haven't done the last 12 months to push myself out of my comfort zone. And I would say the main example of that is traveling a ton. Like I just got back from Japan and Korea a few weeks ago. And the last time I went to Asia was 20 years ago. So me just getting on the flight was a little scary, especially when you're in like Japan where almost nobody speaks English. So I had to really refine my Japanese. And I know a little bit of Korean. And that pushing myself out of my comfort zone, I'm really grateful for, because that's where growth is.
Amazing. I love that. And actually, I started my podcasting journey about 5 years ago, thanks to Tim Ferriss a lot, because I loved his podcast. And one of the things I loved from his podcast was also getting outside the comfort zone, like looking at people in the eyes in the bus, or a lot of little challenges like this. So yeah, that's definitely something that's uh, always exciting. So that's another topic that we can cover. To start with, I'd love to ask you, before we get a little bit into your story also, that I'd love to ask you about, but first is, why would someone want to get better at public speaking?
For sure, Alex, it's a great question. For me, that the way that I've summarized this over the years is the following: communication is an accelerant of dreams. It doesn't matter what your dream is. Communication allows you to get there much faster if you were better at it. A few examples. And it's not even just about business. I'm going to go throughout the entire spectrum. If your goal is to be in a loving relationship with your significant other, well, if you have 10 out of 10 communication or 9 out of 10 communication, you're going to be able to navigate the challenges of a relationship a lot more effectively. If you want to raise a family and you want to have children, well, if you're a bad communicator and all you do is yell at your significant, yell all the time, well, that's the behaviors that you're teaching your children to model. Oh, okay, so when we argue, we're supposed to yell at each other. Well, no. You have to be a lot more calm, you have to be a lot more concise, you have to be more understanding. And those are the behaviors that children copy off of each other. Business. If you know how to speak on a stage, you can get 10 times more leads, 100 times more leads than having one-on-one conversations. So there's a big difference between saying, let me meet Alex for a coffee in Bali versus let me be on Alex's podcast where potentially 1,000 people, 500 people, even if it's 20 people, it doesn't matter. But it's a lot more effective on time. And if you're an even better communicator, then the podcast gets shared and you reach even more lives. That's the business piece. And then the third one, which is more health personal, is the way you communicate with yourself. What are the words that you are using when you talk about yourself to yourself? Are you using positive words, negative words? And that is also communication. So those are the three frames I would look at it from.
Amazing. I love this because, of course, we can think of the professional aspect and the business aspect and things like doing a podcast. But I know for me and a lot of people of this channel, relationships with others and self love and relationship with ourselves is something really important too. So I love that you bring those topics. And actually, on a personal note, and we can talk about it a little bit more, but when I went to your channel, which is amazing, one of the first video I watched was about pronunciation. And the reason I watched it is, of course, because sometimes when I watch the episodes that I record, I find my pronunciation is not so good. I'm right now making more of an effort. And also because in my relationship with my partner, sometimes I don't understand her very well. And that creates some frustrations because I often ask her to repeat. And I know it's something in the relationship. So I love that you bring that too. I'd love to get a little bit of a backstory, like in a nutshell, on you and how you got passionate about it and your background.
Yeah, absolutely. You said a lot of great things there that I just want to touch upon.
Mm.
One is, I totally disagree. I think your pronunciation is very good. It's not bad at all. So I don't think you should be so hard on yourself, especially since we come from the same background. My first language technically is French too.
Mm.
Right? So it's not like, I mean, technically it is because I spent my whole life studying in French until I went to college. So I think you're making a lot of great effort and it shows. The second piece that is so totally random that you're not asking me for, but you asked for feedback, I think, so I'm giving it to you. I think what's fun in partnerships to do is often, and this is not just true with romance, because I think you're better than me at that. I think it's also friendships, business partnerships. So what you can do sometimes is, instead of just saying, can you repeat yourself, can you say that again, can you say that again, because it gets annoying when you say that a lot. All you have to do is you mix it with, what I heard is X. What did I not hear from what you just said? What did I miss? So that way, at least you're acknowledging that you heard something. So it shows more that you're making effort. Versus if you just go, especially if it's really important, you go like, let's say she goes like, I really feel that X problem is in the relationship. Huh? What? Can you repeat that? Instead of going, this is what I heard. Could you just, if you
Okay.
don't mind, share what I missed there in what you share? So that's the second piece.
Yeah, what I
And
do
then
sometimes is, let's say she'll say, let's go for a walk. And I understand something random like, let's grab the cat or whatever. Then I'll ask, let's grab the cat. And she's like, no, it makes it a little bit more funny, but it can still be annoying in the long run.
Totally. And then the question you asked, which is around my personal story, I believe, on how I became. I'll give you the 30-second version, and then feel free to ask me more questions around that if you want. So the 30-second version is, I went to college for accounting, which has nothing to do with my expertise. I just wanted to get a job. When you come from an immigrant family, you're not optimizing for happiness or passion or whatever the gurus tell us to optimize. Or you optimize for money and security. So I became an accountant, and in my college degree, I started doing these things called case competitions when I was 19 years old, Alex. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So while other guys my age were playing soccer or football or some other sport you wouldn't see me playing, I did presentations competitively as a sport. And then as I got older, when I was 20, I started coaching other students on how to speak. Not for money, I just wanted them to win competitions. And then probably 2 years after that, I had the idea for MasterTalk because I realized a lot of the insights I was sharing with them on speaking wasn't available for free on the internet. So I started making videos in my mom's basement, and it accidentally turned into something I never could have imagined.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Actually, it makes me think of a YouTube channel I used to love and still really like, that's very famous and has charisma on command. But then when I watch your videos, I really like that it's maybe a little bit more professional in the way that you really go straight to the point on topics. So it's more educational, a bit less entertaining, and I really like this too.
Totally. And Charlie and Ben do a great job with Charisma on Command. I would say the big difference between the because they do a phenomenal. I think their channel is much better than mine, actually. I think the key difference is, to your point, you actually nailed it on the head. Charlie and Ben are really good at mixing practicality with entertainment. So they'll take really famous celebrities and say, how does Sean Evans from the Hot Ones ask really thoughtful questions? Whereas the angle I take is a lot more technical. It's more about saying, okay, let's forget about the celebrities. What is the thing that you want to do right now? So at the end of the video, I want you to do these 3 things. I want you to message me on LinkedIn or Instagram that you did these things, and then we do the next thing. That's the more the angle I take.
Thank you, thank you. I love that. Is there any what is one thing in your life where you really realized the power of public speaking, like maybe a personal story where like I'm so glad I've learned that, or maybe before you learned that inspired you to learn it?
Yeah, for sure, Alex. I mean, I probably got one on both. But I would say, for me, the earliest memory I have of communication making a difference for me, what that I think is memorable, is absolutely my case competitions. So this case competition journey is a really odd one because no one really knows what that is. You're essentially giving presentations in front of executives of companies, and they pick the best students and they give them job offers. That's the point. That's why I did them initially. And I was really bad at them at the beginning because my speaking wasn't that great. And I think you'll resonate with this. The reason it wasn't that great is because French is my second language. So when I was growing up and I was 5 years old, my parents sent me to French school so that I could learn the language. That's why I'm trilingual today. But I was always really stressed out when I was a kid because when I was in first grade or second grade, I would have to give presentations in French, but I didn't know the language back then. So I'd go like, bonjour, and it always stressed me out. So I never thought I was going to be a great speaker. I actually hated public speaking growing up because I was always forced in a position of weakness, essentially. And the other piece that you probably don't know about me is I have a physical disability in my left arm, so it's crooked because of an accident I had when I was born. So I had a cast on too for the first 2 years of my schooling. So for me, the realization I had was when I started winning competitions in college, when people were looking at me speaking like, wow, this kid's really good. He's winning. And I started getting job offers for winning. That's when I realized that I could, that speaking was making a big impact in my life. And then I wanted other people to feel the same way.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Actually, I'd love to ask you also. I watched one of your videos where you were talking about the storytelling, how to tell a story properly and well. And I also read Yuval Noah Harari's book and how really civilization is based on story, like nations, um, money, religions. These are all stories, and so the power of stories is really phenomenal. And learning to say a story well is such a great power, right? Do you want to share more on this?
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I mean, everything you said is completely spot on. The way that we communicate ever since the dawn of civilization is through stories, right? When we were cavemen, we would tell each other stories about X, Y, or Z, and that's what would get passed on to other tribes and other ways of people. So stories have always been the fundamental way as human beings we retain and communicate information to other people. But then the next step, which is really the crux of the work that I do, is no one's really good at teaching how to tell stories.
Mm.
It's like you kind of have the haves and the have-nots, which is you're either great at storytelling and you're just born with it, or you're just not great at storytelling and good luck, you just can't do it. And I've always wanted to fill that gap in. And let me explain storytelling the easiest possible way to get people started in that journey, because it's not as hard as people think it is. Storytelling boils down to 2 things. What is the key story? What is the key lesson from the story? What is the point of the story? We all have that friend in our life, Alex, and that friend might be our significant other, it might be a best friend, it might be somebody else in our life that comes up to us and says, Alex, you can't believe what happened last week. And then you're like, oh my God, what happened last week? And then 20 minutes later, they're still rambling and you have no idea what happened. You're like, what was the point of this story? Like, this is so stupid, right? I'm sure that's happened to you at least a handful of times. So what's the problem? The problem is we have a story, but there's no point. But the opposite is also true. If we have a point but no story, people don't remember the point. So if I just go like, hey, this is the point that I'm trying to drive, if you go cool, and then because it's not attached to a story, you forget it. So the trick is to start with the lesson first and find the story later. What is the lesson that I want to teach people? In my brand, it's that anyone can be a great speaker. Great. What's the best story? Well, the best story is to talk about my own disability, to talk about how English was not my French was not my first language, and I struggled with that, and that I have a degree in accounting. If I could be a great speaker, anyone could, and the story links well with the lesson. That's how you practice.
I love that. Thank you. And it reminds me that some of the books I prefer, like I read a lot Eckhart Tolle or Osho, and often the parts that I remember the most and where I like also these books is they often have stories to illustrate more the general spiritual teachings that they share. So that's very powerful. When I watched that part on storytelling on your YouTube channel, you also mentioned putting emotions in the story, right?
Absolutely. So within storytelling, there's three things. Easy. I'm going to keep it simple today. There's three things you can do to elevate a story, right? And the three things are details, emotions, and time and space. So details just means adding more detail. So instead of saying something like, I was standing, right, which doesn't really tell you that much, versus going, I was standing in front of the bus stop as a 10-year-old kid and I was so scared, right, about taking the bus without my mom. So now I'm giving you a lot more details. The second piece is emotion, which I added in this example. I was scared. So you know how I felt in that interaction, in that situation. You could visualize the emotion. And then the third piece is time and space. So time and space just means location and how old you are, or where are you in the story. It's 2006. I'm 10 years old, and I'm sitting at a bar next to my dad, and I don't know why they let me in because I'm 10 years old. But somehow my dad convinced the bartender to do it because we had nowhere else to eat at a restaurant. The next restaurant was 3 miles away. So I'm adding time, space, and location, right? Those are the things. But the main idea is to start with what's the key lesson, what's the key story, and then which one you pick the story you're the most excited about, and then you refine it with emotion, details, and time and space.
Thank you. I love that. So yeah, adding all these together, it helps to tell a good story, and then to share ideas, using the story to support the ideas. I'm a coach myself, and as a good coach, I have a coach who's a coach of coach, and one of his codes is share stories, not benefits. So also in the coaching world, because I know in my audience there are a lot of coaches too, it can be really powerful when you share. Oh, it's great to have a coach because it keeps you accountable. Great. And it's like, let me tell you a story of John. He would always want to do that, but each time after 3 weeks, his wife would tell him his podcast idea was stupid and he would totally stop doing it. And once we started working together, when it happened with his wife, I could remind him, and then he kept being consistent with his podcast. Whatever. But sharing stories instead of benefits can be powerful in that, let's say, sales and coaching environment too.
1000%. I love that.
And Brenden, I'd love to ask you just in general, what are your best tips on people who want to get better at public speaking?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an important one to ask. So, what have I brought to the industry, Alex? Let's start this way. I think the challenge with a lot of advice on communication is it's too general. It's too like, oh, be yourself, do this on stage, be less vocal, pronounced better. It's like, okay, but how do you actually tangibly get better? Versus like in fitness, okay, the advice is actually pretty sound. Walk every day, work with a personal trainer, eat less junk food. That will get you results, right? But what are those 3 easy things to do in communication? Because communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time. Storytelling, body language, eye contact, vocal tone variety. And really the question that I'm about to teach the audience is, what are the 3 easiest balls to juggle that I call RQV? RQV. If you just do these 3 things, you will absolutely be able to see quick progress in your speaking. Let's start with R, number 1. R stands for, and I'll take a pause in between each exercise for your reaction. We can practice it together. Number 1 is the random word exercise. Pick any words you want. Phone, soap, headphone, haircut, charity. Pick any word that you want and create a random presentation out of thin air. Out of thin air. And this serves 2 purposes. Number 1 is if you can make sense out of nonsense, you can make sense out of anything. If you can talk about money for 30 seconds, or phone, or camera, or dental floss, when you go back to your expertise, it's going to be very easy for you to communicate your thoughts because you know what you're talking about. And the second benefit is small talk. What is small talk at the end of the day? It's 2 strangers having an unprepared conversation. So if you can get better at the random word exercise, you're going to be able to think on your feet a lot faster. Did you want me to keep going, Alex?
Yeah. So there was FVQ, right?
Oh, you want me to share all 3? Sure.
Yeah.
So the reason I always take a pause is because then I talk for like 15 minutes. But if you want me to keep going, I'll keep going. I love it. So that's R. Now let's go to Q. So Q is the question drill. So the question drill just means we get asked questions all the time in our lives. All the time. At work, at school, from our significant other, our families, on a podcast, on a sales call. We're always being asked questions. But the problem is we're not ready for the questions that life has in store for us. I'll give you an example for me. So when I got started a few years ago, I was probably 22 at the time. I was really bad at communication coaching, naturally, because I was just starting. And some guy invited me to his podcast. This is the first time I did a podcast. And I said, cool. And then he asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to. He said, hey, Brenden, where does the fear of communication come from? And I looked at the guy and I said, Dubai, Tokyo, maybe New York, London, maybe Paris. That's where the fear of communication comes from. So I didn't know the answer. And I was really frustrated with myself. So how did I fix this? Every single day for 5 minutes, I answered one question that I thought the world would ask me about my expertise. Simple as that. So day 1, where does the fear of communication come from? I have a better answer to that now. Day 2, what tips can people work on right now? Day 3, what's your vision for MasterTalk? And every single day, I answered one question. Why should I buy your coaching program? But here's the thing, Alex. If you answer one new question about your expertise for 5 minutes every day for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your industry, and you'll be bulletproof. That's the question drill. And finally, number 3.
Oh, I'll actually pause you on this one.
Please.
A little reflection on this, actually. I love it. And maybe people may think, oh, how am I going to come up with 300 questions? And one way that came into my head is I would just ask ChatGPT, hey, that's my expertise. Can you come up with 400 questions for me? And then you have it done already and you can do one a day.
That's exactly right. That's a very good idea, actually. I'm going to steal from you. I'm going to use that on clients. So thanks for that. That's one way. Another way, since you said most of your audiences were coaches / entrepreneurs, the easiest thing that you can do is go to one of your sales calls this week or your client calls this week and re-listen to it and write down every question that was asked on that call. That's it. Very simple. And then just sit down with yourself and go, now that I have 15 minutes to answer this question without anybody in front of me, how do I answer this question better? So that's another one. But I freaking love your idea about just going on ChatGPT and just writing, I'm a communication coach. Can you give me 100 questions. I'm actually going to try that. That is probably the best insight I've gotten. I've been interviewed 500 times, Alex. That is the best freaking idea anyone has ever given me.
Amazing.
So I'm
And
excited about that.
because there's the mastermind going on here, we could combine the two ideas. So you could download all your transcript from your Zoom calls, upload them into ChatGPT, and be like, "Hey, have a look and look at the most asked questions, and share with me all the questions, starting with the most asked."
That's really good, man.
You get the best of both worlds.
Totally. And then the final one, V, which is simply the video message. Very simple. So a few years ago, I was on a podcast with this woman named Christina. Beautiful girl from Los Angeles. Great girl, really nice, really sweet. Did a great job interviewing me. And I was talking about these video messages and how it's important to send video messages. And then she texts me, like a day or two later, and she said, Brenden, I thought about what you said. And I sent a video message to my grandparents, and it made their day because they live on the other side of the country. And I never really talk to them that much because I'm always so busy with my life. And the reason why I want to push people to do video messages, I don't care if it's to your clients, I don't care if it's to your friends, it's because it serves two purposes. The first one is it helps you get better on camera. And the second one is you are making the world a better place. You're making the world a better place. Like, I do this thing on people's birthday. I haven't been very consistent with it over the last 3 months, I'll be honest. But the first half of the year I was doing super well. Is when it's one of my top clients or top best friend's birthday, I literally take out my phone and I send them a birthday video message. I literally just go, "Hey, Alex, guess whose birthday it is today? It's yours, man. I'm super grateful for you. I hope you have a fantastic day and know that I'm thinking about you." That's it. And there's only one rule to my game. One rule. And if you live by that rule, you'll be the world expert at video messages. And that rule is you are not allowed, under any circumstances, to retake the video. Whatever you make is what you say. That's it. You do that every day, you'll be pretty damn good at video messages.
I love that too. And actually, that's something also I've loved with the functionalities on WhatsApp or Telegram in the past few years, developing voice messages, right? Because, of course, video is the next level of it. So we're on camera. But for pronunciation and speaking properly, even sending voice messages is a good training, right? Actually, though, what I've been doing for a bit is recording voice messages and actually stopping and re-recording them if I don't speak properly, as a way to get better, even if I just send a message to a friend where it wouldn't matter as much that I speak eloquently. So I'm curious, why, if I'm going to send a video message to someone, why wouldn't I use that as an opportunity to practice and to make it better?
Absolutely. And to your point, the way I see it is you're 100% correct. And volume is what creates the improvement. That's what people are missing, Alex, in this conversation. Our fitness trainer tells us to do 20 push-ups on day one. At the end of the 20 push-ups, does our personal trainer say, Alex, I just want to congratulate you. You never have to do a push-up again for the rest of your life. Great job. You have completed this exercise. Let's move on to the next one. No. He says, you're going to do 20 tomorrow, and you're going to do 20 the next day, and you're going to keep doing it. I don't care what your form is. If you walk today, you're going to walk tomorrow, right? It's the same thing with speaking, dude. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, people are writing the random word exercise, right? They're writing the question drill. They're writing the video message, and they're thinking in their mind, Alex, you brought in this cool brown guy named Brenden. He's so cool. He has such great tips, but they're missing the point. And the point is, are you booking 30 minutes every week in your calendar to do the bloody exercises? I have yet to meet one person, Alex, in my whole career. I've been doing this for 9 years now, as of this recording. 9 years, isn't that crazy? I'm 20, I've been doing this since I was 19. And I've yet to meet one human being that didn't pay for accountability. And I want somebody to do this without paying for accountability, literally. To message me and say, Brenden, I did 100 random word exercises. I answered 100 questions, and I sent 100 video messages imperfectly. I've yet to meet one human being. And I've been interviewed so many times. There's not one person who has texted me that yet on Instagram, and I want somebody to text me that.
I love that, and I love that you're bringing the volume to an area where we don't usually do it, compared to the gym, for example, where it makes sense for everyone, right? But I will say though, if you're with a good personal trainer, he'll also want you to have the proper form. So there's also an element, and also as a coach, I'm sure you correct people and you want to train them to get better, but starting with volume.
Totally. For me, Alex, because your nuance is correct, I don't disagree. For me, the big thing that I push onto people, because when I'm on a podcast, my assumption is that most people can't afford me. Because my client base is really small, right? So I'm always going to share an insight from the perspective of I'm going to assume somebody's broke. That's actually the way that I communicate in a podcast. So that way they have no excuse not to take action. That's always the frame I take. So for me, the game is always 80-20. Right? The Pareto principle. What is the 20% of the action that gets 80% of the result? So for me, 80% of the result, I fundamentally believe is 100% just doing the thing. But then what you're commenting on, which is equally relevant, is okay, now that I've done the thing, I've gotten the result. Now, how do I become a master at that? And that's where coaches, personal trainers, or people who can afford coaches should just work with one on day one. But if you can't, just take 80% of the results and just get them, and then work with the coach to perfect your form. Totally.
Amazing. I love that. You've been bringing the random word, which is really interesting because before we started the episode, I told you I like, as a signature in my podcast, to improvise a little promo for my podcast coaching. And actually, comedy improv has been for me a really great way to get better at public speaking and, of course, at improvising and of going beyond my fears also. So I really love that and including it in the podcast. So really interesting that you brought the random word. So I'd love to ask you, Brenden, can you throw me a random word?
Absolutely, Alex. So because you're ready to set the example, I should be setting the example first. So how about this? You throw me a word first. I'll do it. And then I'll throw you one, just so I'm setting the example as the coach.
Okay, dental floss.
Awesome, you got it. So Alex did not give me dental floss prior to this conversation. Watch me tackle it in 3, 2, 1. Alex, I'm a little embarrassed by this, but I have a confession to make. And that confession to make is ever since I went to the dentist the first time, which I don't know, was probably 5 or 6 years old, probably younger. And the dentist asks me, do I floss? I am guilty with the fact that I've lied to my dentist on multiple occasions, where I said, absolutely, Alex, I do floss. And they said, do you really floss, Brenden? After probably the 3rd or 4th time, I just started not lying anymore and telling him, no, I don't floss, and neither should I. And he said, come on, just take some dental floss. I'll give you some. And just start flossing. But what's funny, Alex? Even if I bought dental floss and now I have the best one, I still don't floss as consistently as I should be. Right? Even people who are dentists themselves don't do it that well. Why is that? Why is it then when something we know we should be doing as human beings, we still don't make the decision to do that? And what's the solution? And I think the reason is because just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. And I think that's true with everything in our life. Just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. So what's the solution? I think for me, the solution has been, and I'm still not that great at it, it's starting by celebrating the small things I do on a daily basis. Like intermittent fasting, I'm really good at never eating breakfast. Not that I'm saying people should be or not be eating breakfast, but intermittent fasting works really well for me. Or cutting coffee and caffeine completely out of my diet. I probably drink coffee maybe twice a year just for fun when I want to try a new beverage. But consistently, this is just hot water. That's all I drink on a daily basis. And I think part of that is celebrating the progress that we're making. But with dental floss, I think what's really helped me is creating an environment that makes sense for me. So me in the morning, I hate doing dental floss because I'm brushing my teeth and I have a meeting in 15 minutes. So I don't want to sit there and start doing dental floss. So what I'll do and I'll probably do it today because I haven't done it in a while, is while I'm watching my favorite TV show, I'll do dental floss while I'm watching because I'm not doing anything while I'm watching a TV show. And that's how I've been able to plug in these habits in environments and situations that have added more value. And that's my take on dental floss. There you go.
Beautiful. That was unexpected. Thank you, Brenden.
Of course, man. Now let's throw it back to you. Your word is, I'll make it easy. It's going to be transformation.
Transformation. Yeah, well, a lot of people are talking about transformation, right? Transformation on how do I change my job? How do I become the better version of myself? How do I start doing something that's aligned with my soul's purpose? How do I do those great things I came on the planet to do? But the easiest way to have a proper transformation is not only to go on retreats and go on online courses and learn from coaches. These are all great, but it's to actually integrate it in your everyday life, in the fabric of what you do, the people you hang with. And for me, what's been the most transformative thing probably has been starting a podcast 5 years ago, because then I could connect with amazing individuals like you, Brenden, and many other. I could learn, and at the same time I could share that with the world, so it became my whole purpose. And I think a lot of people, I know a lot of people, they have a podcast within them, and they've done a lot of work before, but this is the next evolution of their transformation. And whatever is in the way, whether it's confidence, whether it's the tech, whether it's making time and having the right processes, well, it's worth looking at how we can make it work. Because I have such a transformational story for myself, I've decided to offer podcast coaching for especially light workers and leaders of the new earth. If that's you, you can just check in the description. There's the details. You can also just DM me the word podcast on Instagram, on Telegram. And I'm currently actually giving free 1 hour session where you can initiate that next level transformation for yourself.
Let's go, Alex. Super job.
Thank you, Brenden. Yeah, actually, on that topic, I would love to ask you, do you have public speaking tips, especially for people who want to have a podcast?
That's a great question. I rarely get asked that. So there's two frames we can take, and I'll take a pause in between. What is the advice for the podcast host? What is the advice for the podcast guest? I'm a lot better at guesting than hosting, so I'll start with guest tips. But if you want host ones too, I'll give them to you. So here are the big things. Number one, a big mistake that podcast guests make on pods is they don't take enough time studying their competition. So what does that mean? The reason I hopefully you're finding that from me, Alex. The reason I'm such a highly requested guest that I have to turn down a lot of guest spots is because what I share is fundamentally unique. Like a lot of podcast guests always share the same thing across each other. And the way that you avoid that is when you're working out, you listen to a podcast of another communication coach. If you're a fitness coach, another fitness coach. If you're a podcast coach, another podcast. And then you're listening to the question that host is asking them. You're listening to their answers and you go, what's missing from their answer? Or what is something new that I have that other people aren't talking about? And you just focus the conversation on that. So notice how I've purposefully not focused any of today's conversation on things that other communication coaches talk about. I haven't talked about ums and ahs yet, though I think my frame on how to get rid of them is fairly unique. I haven't talked about eye contact. I haven't talked about dressing well in a Zoom call. All this stuff other people talk about. I'm really focusing on the core methodologies and IP that I have that other coaches don't have. So that, or don't speak enough about on pods. So when somebody listens to me, they go, oh, this person's unique. Kind of like Gary Vee. Gary Vee is very difficult to compare to other thought leaders. He's just so unique in his style. I would argue his insights, some of his insights are fairly unique, but most of them are not. But his delivery style is totally one of one. He is impossible to duplicate, which is where you want to be. And there's a great quote on this, and then I'll give you the tip to do. The quote is, to be the best is great because you're number one, but to be unique is better because you're the only one. Right? To be the best is great because you're number one. It's not my quota. I don't know who it's from, actually. But to be unique is better because you're the only one. So what's the advice for my podcast guests? Take the time to listen to really big people in your industry. Listen to their answers. Write down specifically how would you answer those questions differently, and practice that differentiation the next time you're on a podcast. Take more risk. That's how you become. And the best way to do this is do it on very small shows. I used to guest on shows that had like 3 listeners or 4 listeners, just so I can practice this. That's why I've been interviewed so many times. And that's my tip for guests.
Amazing. Thank you. And hopefully now you're on a video that gets a million. So we'll try and get it there. And I'd love to ask for a podcast host.
Absolutely, Alex. So podcast host, it's a mix of communication tips and a mix of logistical tips. So there's a term in that Robo Cialdini talks a lot about in his book called Influence. It's a second book that he wrote called Prefluence. So what is prefluence? Prefluence is the number one thing a podcast host should master, which is, what is the context, the frame, the container that you are setting for a guest before the interview even begins? Before the interview even begins. What does that mean? What that means is, and I'm just speaking truthfully, and I don't consider myself to be in this category, but when you get really big names on a show, Gary Vee, Jay Shetty, all this stuff, if you need to approach the frame correctly, which is, they don't care about your show. And I know that's a really tough pill to swallow. They don't care about your show. So for you to change that frame, when you start a podcast, the first 5 minutes of that interview need to change the frame of that interview. So let me give you the context. If I'm Gary Vee, I'm being interviewed 10 times that day. So I've blocked out a day. I'm not Gary Vee. I'm just using Gary Vee as a frame. I'm Gary Vee. I've blocked out the whole day for interviews, and I'm being interviewed back and forth. Bang, bang, bang. So to me, every interview is the fame. Like, my PR team vetted these people to make sure that it's worth my time, and I'm just being interviewed. So how do you prefluence this game? Well, there's a couple of things that you could do. Number one, your opening question is the most important question in that interview. So if your opening question is, so tell me, what's your story? The guy's going to be like, oh, brother, okay, this is going to be a long interview. And he's going to be nice to you. He's never going to tell you. He's never going to tell you. He's going to be totally respectful. I'm just telling you the truth, which I think is probably what you want to hear. And he's going to say, whereas what the best person who interviewed him in my career, Billy Samoa Salibi, who was my best friend, still to this day, he did something really cool when he interviewed Chris Do, who's the founder of The Future. And in his opening question, he looked at Chris and he said, what does September 25th, 1974 mean to you? And Chris just took a pause and he said, that was the day that I fled Vietnam. How do you know that? And he just said, I don't know, you tell me. And then what this does is it completely changes Chris Do's focus. And it goes from, he's just another podcast host, to, I better take this interview as seriously as he's taking me right now. And they just get into the zone and they start focusing on that person 100%. And that's what creates the magic. Master prefluence is the tip.
Thank you for sharing that. And then you do that with some research before. I wanted to ask you for feedback also. For me, that's also why I asked at the beginning, what are you grateful for? I feel it's like an easy question, but at the same time, people can go deep or go more personal, or it can get them a little bit outside. But yeah, what do you think of that?
I think that's a great question. Because for me, especially at this level, I don't think you're a bad communicator, Alex. Because what I always like to say in coaching, when I coach people on speaking, is it starts objective and it finishes subjective. So what does that mean? You know, if somebody's really bad at speaking, maybe you were like this 10 years ago when your French accent was thicker, when you're just getting started. When did you start learning English, by the way? Was it 20 years ago, 10 years ago? When was it for you?
Yeah, at least 20 years ago. I'm 34 now, so yeah, maybe when I was 10.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's what I thought too. So when you were getting started, I mean, obviously all my advice is very apparent. Hey, doing the random word exercise, all this stuff. But you've practiced a lot just based on what you've shared in this podcast. You've done a lot of improv now. You've done a lot of podcast episodes. You've grown. But now we're getting to a place where my objective stuff could work, but it doesn't fully work anymore. Now we're entering the realm of opinions. So what I'm sharing now is not necessarily this is what you need to do. It's more this is a thought I have for you, and I just want you to simmer that thought in your mind. So what is that thought? I think what all the best podcast hosts have in common, the best ones, Guy Raz, How I Built This, Lewis Howes, School of Greatness, Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory, Joe Rogan, the people I think are the best right now in the world. They only have one thing in common, which is their intention for the show is unique to them. So when Joe Rogan's interviewing someone, he has a very specific agenda, which is I just want to have a free flowing conversation for a very long time, for 3 hours. I want to talk about a bunch of random shit while I'm asking you cool advice. And I want us to be best friends at the end of this interview. That's really his intention. That's how he approaches that frame. And you'll notice if you watch 3 or 4 of his interviews, that is actually the frame that has been consistent since episode 1. Yeah, we're going to learn a lot, but I really want to focus on just a bunch of random things and just having a good time, which is hard to do, but Joe Rogan is an exceptional conversationalist. So he's been able to mix all of these things together. So that's one piece. The second style of interviewing is somebody like Guy Raz, How I Built This. Guy Raz is completely different. He's super, super, super analytical. He's done every piece of homework on every little thing that you've done. And he's asking. When he interviewed Gary Vee, I was listening to this episode, I thought it was mind-blowing. Like, he knew so much about Gary that he knew the title of the wine store in 1986 about his story. It was wild. And the guy just looked at him like, what the frick? How the frick does he know all this? So it's like super, super detailed. And then you have the third style of intro. I'm keeping it really simple today, where it's kind of a mix of both approaches, which is there's an intention and there's some research. A good example of this person is like a Tom Bilyeu or a Lewis Howes, where their specific intention for the podcast is to help their audience overcome self-doubt. So a lot of their questions are still research. So they'll say something like, Alex, when I was reading about you, I remember 20 years ago, you were very public about how you had a lot of self-doubt around X. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you overcame that? So it's a mix. It's still free-flowing, but it's focused on a loose agenda around self-doubt. So I think the question you have to ask yourself, which is not a question you're going to solve for today, is what is the 10-year vision for your podcast? Who is the podcast for? And what is the specific transformation you're looking to create for that person that you feel Rich Roll, Lewis Howes, Dr. G, and all these people aren't really solving for that person right now? And if you can figure that out, I think that's the magic.
Thank you so much. And look, we could go for so long. It's been super interesting. So thank you so much, Brenden. And I also wanted to speak a little bit about pronunciation. Also, I wanted to tell you you're a really good guest for that reason, which is that you leave pauses. And sometimes when I interview a guest, I ask them a question and they go on a 15-minute tangent. And it's usually not in the highest benefit of the episode, then can get a little bit boring. And I love that almost awkwardly at some point there was a pause, but I love that you leave that space for the conversation. So as a podcast host with over 200 episodes, I can tell you it's really nice to have you because you leave these pauses, you speak really well, you also acknowledge the questions and really listen deeply. So thank you for being such a great guest also on the show.
Totally, man. And the quick point on that is I wasn't like that for the first 100 episodes. As you can tell from my energy, even if I try my best to work on it, I can ramble for 20 minutes. I love talking. That's why I'm a horrible podcast host. So when I realized, like, RQV is a great example of that, because I've shared RQV probably 300 times. So the first 50 times I shared RQV, I would just share the entire RQV. So it would take 15 minutes. It's still useful. It's not bad. But then after, when I would listen to the host energetically, they would either forget some parts of RQV or they would just go, like I feel, and their reaction is often the mirror of their audience's reaction to what I'm saying. So I was like, wait a second, let me change this. So then the next time, and this is why it's important for you to be self-critical and re-listen to your own episodes. I don't do that as much anymore. But my first 50 appearances, I re-listen to almost every single appearance. Now I only do it when I'm on shows that causes me stress. Like I was on a really big show this year. I re-listened to that show like 3 times to see what I could have done better. And the point is, I took a pause the next time and it worked a lot better. So I'm still learning too and growing. So yeah, great points.
Amazing. Thanks, Brenden. To close this episode, I'd love to ask you a little bit about the water charity. Actually, you talked about the vision for the podcast. So the Light Leaders really is for leaders of the new earth, people who want to raise the consciousness of the planet and are really wanting to dedicate their life to, yes, of course, enjoying having a beautiful life, but also doing good in the world and creating what we call the new earth. And as part of it, some of the people in the light worker category, as we can call them, or spiritual entrepreneurs, sometimes have blockages around starting a business, making money, because there is also a lot of shadow around money in our world today. So there can be good reasons for it. But obviously, building businesses, money can be used for good. And I know it's also something that close to your heart with the charity around water, right? Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure, Alex. Happy to. One of the questions that Scott Harrison, the founder of Charity Water, has helped me think about in elevating consciousness and creating more change in the world is a question I hadn't really considered before. And the question is simply this: what is the world's easiest problem to solve? What is the world's easiest problem to solve? I'm a big believer in this idea, Alex, that in our human lives, we should be trying to solve 2 problems because we can't solve everything. So I'm all about solving 2 problems. The first one is the one that you are uniquely positioned to solve. I'm very grateful. I found it fairly early in life. Communication comes really easy to me. And I really feel that I am the human being who's going to be able to crack the code of communication for all of humanity forever. So that way, like when I publish my book and I'm ready to do that, it will be the encyclopedia on communication. You'll read it and go like, that's all I need to know about communication. I don't need to read any other book. And that's a life's work. That's why I'm holding my breath. I still have a lot more to work on, still a lot more to learn. And then when I'm ready for that, I will create that book and create a lot of magic with it. And AIs and different forms of technology. So that's an easy problem for me to solve. I'm 28 years old. I already have some crazy cool clients. I'm 10 years into this game. I already have a lot of recognition in this space. If I spend the next 40 years of my life working on this, I'll totally be the GOAT. That's really the goal. The other piece is simply the world's easiest problem to solve. And all of us banding together as a humanity and just solving them. So for example, cancer research is noble work. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to fund that type of work, but we've already spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars on funding cancer research, and we've made very little progress, right? Or some progress. Whereas my encouragement to people is not to stop funding that, but rather saying, can we all just come together as a humanity and just solve the problem that already has the technology? It's just a money problem. And the water crisis is that. That's why I'm a big fan of Charity Water. The water crisis has already been solved for 91% of humanity. So let's solve it for the 9%. Because if we solve that problem, and I have to get better at trying to solve it too, but if we could solve that problem for humanity, and I just think Scott Harrison's the best in the world at it, and I highly recommend people check out his book. It's called Thirst, Thirst. It's the best book I've ever read in my life, and it's the one I gifted the most to other people. I'm a big believer in the idea that if you can solve this problem for 91%, you can solve it for 99, if not 100. So let's go in that direction.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Brenden. Beautiful project. And it's been a real pleasure to have you on the show. And thank you to everyone who listened and watched this episode. Have a beautiful day. Thank you, Brenden. Thank you, everyone.